We are almost at the halfway point of the winter break. Yes, that's right, we're not even halfway there to the first race of the season. So I would say it's prime time to look over the most impressive drivers on the grid last year in 2024. And you might be thinking to yourself, well Zach, surely it's just Max Verstappen, right? Well, to spice things up a little bit, I'm going to take one driver from the Backmarkers, your Saubers, Williams, etc., your midfield, and your front pack, bar Verstappen, who I think had the best and most impressive seasons in 2024, whether it be because of their race results, coming onto the F1 scene, getting the results under pressure, carrying a team, all of the above. So without further ado, like and subscribe and enjoy the video. So we'll start off with the Backmarkers, and for me, that's your Williams and your Saubers. Now, some would say, you know, it's 8th to 10th, but looking at VCARB's results, you can't really put them in to that Backmarker team. You really did have Williams and Sauber as the worst teams, and then sort of the midfield. So for me, it's just 9th and 10th. Now, obviously, Logan Sargent didn't impress me in a moment. He impressed me with how many times he could crash in a season and not score a point. That's why he's the GOAT. But being actually honest, a lot of people would, I think, go for Alex Albon. And yes, he did have a great season at Williams. It was still good. He got the most points in that Williams with 12 over the season, but especially in the back half of the season, there were a lot of mistakes. And for me, I don't think he was the most impressive driver on the Backmarkers. And then you have the Saubers. You've got Bottas. Again, not his finest 2024. With the Sauber, it's hard to really tell exactly what he could have done. He had a few good qualifying performances, but the race pace was not there. And then you have his teammate Zhou. And for me, Zhou had a brilliant race in Qatar, but one race does not take away from the rest of the season being pretty mid, I guess you could say. It wasn't dreadful, but it wasn't great either, was it? So for me, Backmarker wise, it's got to be Franco Colapinto. And this is what makes it interesting when you're talking about Backmarker teams, because by no means did Franco Colapinto have an outstanding season. It was still full of mistakes. However, it is interesting when you look over the stats again. In his first 5 races, managed to come 12th, 8th, 11th, 10th, and 12th consecutively. In a Williams, that was a massive feat. In 2 races, he managed to outscore both of Albon's last teammates, Latifi and Sargent. And the other key thing for me, which makes it such an impressive season for him, is he only had it from Italy onwards, so he didn't have a lot of time to impress. And my God, did he impress. Now, if you know a lot about F2, you probably would have known Franco Colapinto. But for a lot of people, this guy just came out of the blue. He wasn't anyone people were properly looking at. He wasn't a Hadjar, etc. And then he just got put into that Williams seat and delivered under the pressure, putting his name into F1 contention. And my God, has he. Realistically, he would be at Williams for 2025 if they weren't getting one of the better drivers on the grid, Carlos Sainz, in that seat. That's a bit harsh for him, but that's how the cookie crumbles in F1. However, he's managed to get a reserve role at Alpine. Definitely wouldn't have got that if he was just having his season in F2. But now he's in that position where doing after 6 races, if he doesn't perform, we could be seeing Colapinto in that Alpine. Now that is such a step up from the start of the season to now. And that's what makes him the most impressive driver for me out of the Backmarker bunch. You've got the points results, you've got doing decent in a Williams consecutively over a lot of races, and you've got his reputation just going through the roof. However, like I mentioned, it wasn't the best season. He did have a lot of crashes going into the end of the season. We saw him take DNFs at Brazil, Qatar, Abu Dhabi, and he did crash in the Vegas qualifying as well. So he wasn't helping Williams cost-wise, but with great pace comes great responsibility, I guess. And that's what he's got to learn. But yeah, I also have to mention, he also had interest from the Red Bull family. So it was just an incredible season for him, and he really did show why he should be in F1. Now, this would be your Aston Martins from 5th all the way down to your VCARBs in 8th. Now, straight away, a name that might come to your head is Liam Lawson. Now, technically, on some of the points, he would be an impressive driver last season. He did come in, did do pretty decently in that VCARB. He got the Red Bull seat. That's as impressive as it gets, and he got that from his 2024 and before results. So yes, in a kind of way, but for me, Liam Lawson didn't do anything crazy. He then kind of had a lackluster end to the season. So for me, it can't be him getting the most impressive in the midfield. So realistically, it boils down to 2 drivers. You have Nico Hulkenberg or Pierre Gasly. But for me, Nico Hülkenberg just loses out to Pierre Gasly. If I did this whole video before Mexico or Brazil, Nico Hülkenberg would have won. It would have been no consideration of any other driver. Hülkenberg was the best driver in the midfield, consistently getting good results and getting point scoring position for his team Haas, putting them at the time into 6th in the championship. However, Pierre Gasly, I cannot commend you enough for how brilliant your end to the season was. Now, don't get me wrong, like I mentioned for the backmarkers with Franco Colapinto, it's sort of similar to Gasly in a way that there was plenty of mistakes he made. The first half of the season, Gasly wasn't amazing. Now, he did have his performances, which in that tractor of an Alpine, start of 2024, was pretty decent. I mean, he got points in Monaco. Pretty good feat for an Alpine back then. And then he'd go on to get 4 consecutive points results with 9th, and another 10th. Again, brilliant from where Alpine were at the start of the season to get them to P9 in the championship. But realistically, it's the last 4 races I really want to talk about. He was a man possessed by his 2021 former self. Pierre Gasly got a podium 3rd place finish in the Brazil GP. Now, there was a lot of chaos, but he persevered and got on the podium in that Alpine. Incredible stuff. He then, 1 race later, went on to Vegas, where he qualified 3rd. That 3rd place meant he outqualified both McLarens, Leclerc, Verstappen, and Hamilton. Like, what? And yes, the race pace wasn't amazing, but points were still on until his car gave up. Then you had P9 in the Qatar Sprint. No points for that, but still showing good top 10 finishes, which then he would get a P5 in the race. An extra 10 points for Alpine, which was so massive for them as a team. And then to finish off the season, he got a P7 in Abu Dhabi. Now, this all meant that by the end of the season, past Abu Dhabi, Pierre Gasly was 10th in the standings, a point ahead of Nico Hülkenberg, which would have sounded ridiculous if I told you that, before Brazil. You then also had Alpine outscoring Haas, getting from P9 in the championship to P6. And yes, Esteban Ocon did help out. He got a few points here and there, but a huge bulk of those points came from Gasly. He single-handedly got that team back up into contention with that V-carb and Haas fight. And I just can't give it to anyone else when you've done that for a team. P9 to P6, up to P10 in the standing. What an end to the season he had. And even when the car wasn't good, he was still getting point finishes. Pierre Gasly had a brilliant 2024 and 100% was the driver who impressed me the most in that midfield for 2024. So this, of course, would be Mercedes and upwards. So 4th to 1st, Mercedes, Ferrari, Red Bull and McLaren. And like I mentioned, just forget Verstappen is a racing driver at the minute. Pretend he never got out of the Ice Age. He's still there. Don't worry about him. As yes, it would be a pretty short video if I just made it about one driver. We know it would be Verstappen. He won the championship. So with that in mind, who could it be? Hamilton, 2 wins, one at his home Grand Prix, had a great middle part of the season. Sainz, Piastri, Norris even. For me, hands down, it has to be Charles Leclerc. And I don't think there's anyone close. I mean, just look at these results. Bar Canada, Austria and Silverstone, where Ferrari really had a bad little middle ground where their upgrades didn't really work. They lost a lot of ground on McLaren and even Mercedes. Bar those results, Leclerc, when he finished a race, did not finish below 5th. That is so consistent, and that's the consistency you need from your lead driver to get you in those constructor fights. When McLaren's, Mercedes, Verstappen, not really Perez, so just Verstappen, that's 5 drivers who all at some point would have had races where they were quicker than the Ferrari of Charles Leclerc, and he still managed to get back up into those top 5s, and he is a miracle worker in that Ferrari. I don't know how he managed to do that. These results single-handedly, like I mentioned, got Ferrari in a Constructors' Championship fight, which they only lost by a few points, and then Leclerc himself almost beat Lando Norris, the title contender technically for the season because he was the closest to Max Verstappen, only by 18 points. And that's because Lando Norris won the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. So it's incredible how close he got to McLaren and to Norris in a Ferrari that we can see from the stats wasn't as quick as the McLaren averagely throughout the season. And then you had his individual moments. You had Monaco winning at his home Grand Prix, breaking the Monaco curse once and for all. You then had Italy, Monza, where he won against all odds, where McLaren had a 1-2. It looked all set for a McLaren showdown. And then with their inter-team battles, papaya rules, all of this bollocks, with their strategy cock up as well, Leclerc put in a brilliant drive that meant both McLarens could not catch up to him by the end of the race. Because as we saw in Carlos Sainz in the Ferrari, if he wasn't driving phenomenally, then he still would have got overtaken by the McLarens again. So he beat the McLarens at a track that suited them more. And then you had the utter dominance of Cota, where he beat Carlos Sainz by 8.5 seconds and then almost beat Verstappen, the next contender, by 20 seconds. It was 19.5 seconds. And bar the McLarens, that was unheard of. Well, and Verstappen at the start of the season, that was unheard of gap to the rest of the grid. Only Charles Leclerc could do that. Incredible stuff from him. So yeah, without a doubt, if we take away Verstappen, and I mean it's close with Leclerc and Verstappen, but Verstappen still technically is, but push him away, like I said, there's no one else who gets close to me, and that's why Charles Leclerc is the most impressive driver out of the front runners. But that is the video for you all today. Comment down below, who do you think were the most impressive drivers of 2024? I mean, you've got the likes of Behrman, who came in for Ferrari as a stand-in, and at Haas, he did pretty good, but I don't think I could take him into consideration because he only had a few races. There's a few other drivers who did do well. Yuki Tsunoda also had a good season, but I don't think for me it was the best. So I'd be interested to see what you all think and who impressed you the most. But anyway, as always, love you all so much. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you all on Friday. Take care.